Hi, everybody. Welcome to OFM, where metabolic health matters. I'm your host, Peter Defty, and today's guest is a good friend of mine, Diane Credenda, whom I met and started working with in 2013. And Diane is a triathlete specializing in the 70.3 distance. She's been a triathlete actually since 1985. So she has a lot of longevity in the sport and seen it evolve. So it gives her a good expert frame of reference and perspective to discuss what we're going to talk about today. But also, Diane is a doctor of Oriental medicine and acupuncture. And on top of that, she's worked in reproductive endocrinology, with her husband, Paul Magirelli, and in successfully using not just the conventional approaches of hormone therapy and things and IVF that's used in Western medicine, but incorporating her acupuncture and also what she's learned about OFM to help women get their hormonal balance back so they can conceive and have healthy babies. So she's also got a pretty deep medical background, but it's not entrenched in just the conventional medicine. It's all about problem solving and using all these concepts: conventional medicine, acupuncture and Oriental medicine, and then OFM to get that hormonal balance going. So Diane's somebody I've been wanting to get on for years, but it's just kind of between our busy lives, it's just never happened. We just have all these great conversations. Nothing gets done until now. Today we're doing it. So welcome, Diane. Great to see you. You look great. I like the shirt, by the way.
Yes. That's
So I kind of gave the audience sort of a quick rundown, but I want to talk to you more. But let's just start out. You're recently returned from the 70.3 World Championships in Finland, where you finished 10th overall.
Yes.
And on top of that, following that, you guys did a little vacation. So tell us, let's start by telling people the last 6 months, from training for this and what you just shared with me about how you've qualified for Ironman, but the last 6 months, what happened? Because 10th overall is clearly not what you wanted, but based on the situation, you did great. I mean, You surprised everybody.
Yeah, thank you. So I lost about 8 good weeks of training because I had a knee injury, and MRI showed I did have some torn meniscus, so we knew it was structural. I contacted your team and Peter and had lots of help. Because I'm an acupuncturist, I could give myself acupuncture every single day and up my collagen, made sure that I was not eating anything inflammatory. And I entered that race with just wanting to finish. I wanted the red carpet, right? And I knew that I wasn't going to be as fast as I normally am, but my goal was to finish and not re-injure my knee. It surprised me because I really didn't know what to expect. And what surprised me most in Finland, it was a really hard course and hill after hill after hill. And I never once wanted to quit. I just kept putting one foot forward, doing my little mantras. And it was unbelievable where I got that to finish that race. It gives me goosebumps. Because I remember on the run thinking, you know what, it's okay to walk a little bit, Diane. It's okay to walk up these hills. And then on this, when I crunched the data after my race, what I found was that the second half of that run, which is, total distance is half marathon, I had a faster second loop. So I had a negative split, which was amazing. And so I feel like whatever I'm doing, I guess what it did is it gave me confidence in my body that even with suboptimal training, I could get out there and I could be top 10. And there were some really amazing women in my age group. It seems like those who were still racing in my age group which is I'm going to be 71 in October, that the ones out there are still awesome athletes. 2018, I did South Africa World Championship and I placed third, which is amazing to me. So I'm getting more confidence and building a base of what I know I can do.
Now and you had no knee pain during this?
No
event.
knee pain at all. No, honest to goodness, I would have stopped if I had knee pain. If I would have had knee pain, I would not have finished that race.
And after the race, you guys spent a vacation. Tell us about that, because you did a lot of walking around, right?
We did. We actually walked around. We went to Iceland and we drove from town to town and we went on some hikes to see some geysers and we rode some horses, some little Icelandic horses. And yeah, it was amazing. One of the things also I was really worried about was food, because I'm kind of anal retentive about my
not kind of.
And I was really worried because I was in a different country. I wasn't sure what they were going to have. And so Peter always tells me to let go a little bit. And so I just said, you know what, eat what you can. I found a really interesting pre-race meal it had potatoes in it, but it was like in a pastry potatoes. And I just made sure I had butter. I fueled perfectly. I had everything I needed. We were in really cramped areas in these little hotels. In Finland, it was like a dorm room. And it was amazing.
Kind of like where you had to go outside to change your mind.
Yeah, it was really outside of my comfort zone. And I just decided I can either adapt or I can get upset. So I just decided I was going to adapt.
Yeah. That's what my friend Bruce LaBelle told me years ago about running 100-milers. The only thing you can plan for is something happening you didn't plan for, and how you adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in Chinese medicine, we say, everybody has stress, but it's how you adapt to that stress that makes a difference in your life. And as I get older, I see that more and more, even in myself, which is a good thing. I'm getting better at adapting and rolling with the punches a little better.
Yeah, and that's a very good thing to see, because you see so many people who get older. As they get older, they get more entrenched in certain ways. It's like I always say, I don't want to get old man syndrome.
Right. Well, the first time I told Paul, my husband, that I wanted to do a half Ironman at age of 59, he said, why? Why do you want to do that? And I said, because I don't want to become a wimpy old lady. Yeah. And that was in 2012.
So let's just, that's where we are now. So let's just back way up.
Okay.
Back to so the audience can understand in detail your history, where you're from, when you started triathlon, and we'll just start and how it got you to finishing third in 2019 at South Africa, and just a few weeks ago finishing 10th overall under
injured.
Coming back from an injury, and being able to not re-injure yourself and just keep that trajectory going. So I'll let you take it back to the prehistoric days.
Yes, the dinosaur age.
Because we're dinosaurs.
I know. That's okay. I'm proud to be a dinosaur.
Yeah, so I'm a Neanderthal.
I know. I was living in Nova Scotia. I had just had my second child, and I decided I want to take some baby weight off. So I went to the pool and I taught myself to swim. And a year later, they started a master's program. So I was getting some coaching. And of course, all the people who were in swim team were triathletes. So I bought a bike at 30. I started running. I swam at 30, bought a bike at 31, did mostly Olympic distance triathlons, and I would do the swim and the bike and then get somebody to run for me as a team. And after a couple of those, it's like everybody's saying, just do all three, Diane, right? So I started running, and it ended up that when I raced, I had a faster time doing all three than when I got a runner. So
That sparked the fire in you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was crazy. And so long story short, I ended up with some health problems in Nova Scotia, and I used Western medicine because they were my peeps, right? And
Well, you were an X-ray tech, right?
I was an X-ray tech. Yeah, I did CT scans, special procedures, that kind of stuff. And they put me on.
That was essentially your career at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, it was 20 years of an X-ray tech. And back then, nobody really knew what I had. The virus killing my bone marrow cells. My thyroid was hyperactive. I had what I called Marty Feldman eye, which was bulging. So Western medicine, it was horrible, and Western medicine didn't really know what it was, except they put me on thyroid medications and got my liver enzymes and, things back down. But when I tried to run or do anything athletic, I couldn't. I was exhausted. I would get this terrible rash. And when I went back to the hematologist, he said, "Oh, your labs are fine. You're back." It's like, I'm not back. So I heard about an acupuncturist who moved locally, and I began to see him. And within a year and a half, I was off all the medication, including the thyroid medication. So I was able to get back to training and racing. At that point, I had this epiphany. Oh my gosh, this Eastern medicine is amazing. So I decided that I think I was 39, almost 40 at this time, that I was going to have a career change. So I sold my house, moved from Nova Scotia, and went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and got my Doctor of Oriental Medicine degree. It's pretty well a 4-year course. It's a master's. And then I studied in China for 3 months and came back. By then, my kids were too old for me to go back to Nova Scotia, right? Because I'm from Minnesota. So I thought, where can I go? Yes, from Minnesota. I married a Canadian. That's how I got there. But he was my first marriage. So then I thought, where can I go? So I drove to Colorado, and it was like, oh my gosh, look at all these athletes. The Olympic Training Center is here. I'm going to come here and specialize.
That's Colorado Springs, right?
Colorado Springs, yes. People come here to train, but the Olympic Training Center is a mile away from my house. So I thought, this is perfect. I'm going to specialize in sports medicine. And what I realized, that athletes don't really take care of themselves. They don't do anything preventative because they spend a lot of their money on shoes and bikes and races and those kinds of things. And I got a phone call from an acupuncturist in Denver and asked me if I would help her reproductive endocrinologist with local people here in Colorado Springs to treat them with acupuncture, which increased blood flow through the uterine artery. So when they were given the IVF, in vitro fertilization medications, the medications would get to the ovaries where they could then absorb it. So that's kind of how I got started with the whole endocrine part of my journey. And then, of course, menopausal women and period stuff. I worked with a lot of women that way. So I was still racing, training, and had a local coach who was still telling me to eat carbs.
You were on the high carb.
Yep, I basically was.
Just like the science said.
Absolutely.
That's what the Olympic Training Center website tells you.
Oh, I know. So
don't dope, but get addicted to carbohydrates.
Right. I mean, and it worked for me for a while, Peter. It did. And then when I did my first half Ironman at the age of 59, I think, 59, I got off that race, and my skin was peeling. My gut was a mess. I could hardly even take a shower. And I went, okay, I've got to figure something out. So I do a lot of listening to podcasts, and I heard a podcast about Vespa, and this guy was showing you on this podcast or on his YouTube what he's mixing in his drink for his Ironman. And I went, Vespa, oh, that's weird. So I connected with you, I think originally.
Yeah,
I remember you calling my office, my acupuncture office, and talked to my front desk, and she said, Peter wants to know where you heard about him. So then I called you back, and that I think was our first encounter.
That was 2015. Right?
Yeah, 13. And so you were so solicitous. You spent phone calls on with me. I called you that first week and said, Peter, I can't get up at 4:15 for my 5:30 swims. I'm exhausted. And you kept saying, it's okay, Diane, give yourself a couple weeks. This is just detox. And you were right. Like after 2 weeks, there was a switch. I had more energy. My gut was fine. And I did my first half Ironman fat adapted, I think after 7 months or 8 months of being fat adapted. And that was St. George, which is a pretty hard course.
Yeah, I remember when we first started, we did a metabolic reset, and it was a couple weeks of hell.
Yeah,
you were
exactly.
So carb addicted.
It was.
Yeah,
it was. And I can tell you, I have a friend who's a good friend. And when I was in the back in my carb days, we went for a hike after my race, and he said to me, Diane, you don't look like a triathlete. It was really weird. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, like, you're puffy, right? And so when I look back, this was years ago, when I look back at my body back then, there's been a huge transformation. I had cellulite. I don't have that anymore. I leaned out. It's just been amazing to me. And it's not that hard.
Yeah.
It's really not.
Yeah, your first race was Ironman 70.3 St. George.
Right.
And up to then, you were kind of doing Ironmans, and you were losing your competitive edge, right?
I think so. Well, I can just remember, like, we called it race brain. Like when you're out there, you kind of feel like it's surreal. I used to call it race brain. I'd come across the finish line and I'd be blabbing something to my husband, and he would be going like, what's going on, right? And he was at the finish line of St. George. And I came across the finish line, and he goes, oh my God, like whatever. And I knew I came in first because he was tracking me, and it was like, oh my God, first, oh my God, that's incredible, because it was a really hard course.
You were smiling at the finish.
I was smiling, and Paul was like, well, what do you want to do now? I said, I want to go shopping. Because that's what I like to do after a race. He goes, I want to go home and lie down. I'm exhausted, right? And I just did 6.5 hours, and he's exhausted, right? So.
Yeah, and I remember one thing you said about it, like even in the heat, you were riding along, and it was the spring, and the desert bloom, and you could smell the flowers.
Oh my God, it was amazing.
And you weren't in the fog.
No, it wasn't. And I remember being laser focused, like back in the day, we had to put our age on our leg. So I'd kind of get by somebody, and I'd scope them out. Like, is that somebody I have to pass? It was just like maybe laser concentration.
Yeah, you were in the zone.
Yeah, I was in the zone, and I enjoyed it. You know what I mean? It went so fast. Yeah.
Nice.
So I was a believer, it's just been a huge benefit to me, for sure.
Yeah. And so I remember Paul saying to me, your husband's, for the audience, he said to me, I used to absolutely dread going to Diane's races, because she would literally will herself across the finish line, and she'd be ashen gray and in a sort of a delirium. And Paul's an MD PhD. So for the audience, he's a reproductive endocrinologist. Diane, she got so much into helping families out, she married the guy, right?
Yeah. We always say research led to romance.
There you go. Yeah. So, but even as a doctor, he wasn't really on board with the racing because of what it did to you before you got fat adapted, started using the Vespa.
Right.
And now he said she's got a smile on her face, blah, blah, blah. And so that year you went to Mount Treblanc,
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, Mount Treblanc. Yep.
And the whole sweater story.
Yeah. I saw we had to do 2 loops. It was a ski resort. So there were cobblestones and it was 2 loops kind of up. And at the top of where we turned around, I saw this sweater in the window and came across the finish line. And I'm all excited. And I said, Paul, I found this really cool sweater. I want to go shopping. I want to go and buy that sweater. He's like, oh my God.
and since then, and so what's your trajectory been with your racing? It seems like you've been pretty consistent since then. Tell us about that.
So since St. George, I've qualified for world championships every single year. I haven't always raced them, but I have qualified. So to me, that speaks, and as I get old, and I'm still qualifying at almost 71, right?
Yeah.
So
you went to New Zealand and Mount Treblanc, New Zealand?
Yeah,
or do you not go to New Zealand?
Yeah, no, I deferred because New Zealand over COVID, it closed down 3 times. So I deferred my New Zealand to Finland, which I just raced. And it was 2018 that I went to South Africa and had a great race. I was third overall. And that was unbelievable.
Yeah. And you're just going strong ever since.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we were talking earlier, this is one of the important things I want to talk about with the audience, because, you've got a medical background, but it's a varied one, right? So you've got various perspectives, and this is an important thing that I've been trying to get across to people. And the problem is, in today's society, our ways of communication and scientific method tend to be one-dimensional.
Right.
And when you're looking at the individual, the reality is we're in the real world, and reality is dictate that usually the problem-solving process, or how do we optimize, it's multivariate. There's all these things going into the mix that need to be addressed. So, and you've got Western medicine behind you, you've got endocrinology behind you, you've got Eastern medicine behind you, and the icing on the cake since has been getting that fat metabolism going, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, as we always have been talking and having all these conversations, because we talk about all the various things that go into optimizing both your health and performance. And that's an important key. And so with your background in endocrinology, Eastern medicine, OFM, and then training and racing over the years, especially since 2013, when you got started with OFM to now, that's a 10-year, that's a decade.
Oh, I know.
Right. And then what it was like previous to that, maybe you can help people to get more into the thinking that for their own Rubik's Cube of getting optimal health and performance, that they need to step back from that messaging of, oh, this is the solution. Because I don't sell Vespa as a one-trick pony, right? It's like Vespa works, it's fantastic, and you can use it without changing anything. But if you start to look at all these other things you can do, it's synergistic.
Yeah. Well, and I counsel my patients, and by the way, I just retired. So,
but you're still doing a little fill-in work, right?
I'm doing a little fill-in just to keep my heart happy. But yes, so this is a whole different scenario for me. So I was working, training, racing, and I don't know how I ever did it now that I'm semi-retired. But anyway, so having said that,
plus you were helping out at the clinic, the reproductive IVF clinic.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I think, the most important part for me was that what we know about carbohydrates is they're highly inflammatory. And that's across the board. I mean, they're now calling Alzheimer's diabetes type 3. Western medicine is.
Type 3 diabetes.
So,
Yeah.
yep. And so what does that say? Carbohydrates, sugar, fruit, that's all inflammatory. And what happens when we get inflamed? We get puffy, we get water retention, our brain gets foggy. And it's, sometimes I feel like I want to get a bullhorn and say, people, get off the carbs. And of course, like you said, it's not a one protocol, because somebody like me who's training, 14, 15 hours a week, I might need some carbs now and again. But those are what you call strategic. And that's what I look at. And it's been a learning game for me, because I've tried like totally fasting before I go into a 70.3. And what I've learned is, like you always say, eat more if it's cold, less if it's really hot, more salt with hot. And each race I've had, I've learned key things about how my body is. I tend to be cold. And if I get cold, I'm toast, right? So I need to like fuel more on the body. Yeah. So I think that's what I like about OFM and what you guys are promoting, is because it's individualized. And I can remember you telling me, Diane, it's okay to have carbs, because it was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get inflammation. But what I found after following your advice was that, sometimes you need those carbs. If you're going to be doing a 70.3 the next day, you got to bring in some carbs. Yeah.
And then take them out in the recovery phase.
Yeah, exactly. Although it's nice to have, a couple glasses of wine after a race, I have to say.
Oh no, and
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like a treat.
But part of the magic of OFM is that by building your metabolic capacity, you have that resilience to where the occasional alcohol or the occasional hit of carbs is actually adaptive and can work to your advantage rather than not. You have those matches, and like on race day, you have the extra matches to burn without depleting the well, right?
Right.
Because, like you've heard me say before, it's not a question of if you're going to have a problem on a high carb protocol for diet and nutrition for your sports. It's when you're going to have a problem and in what form. We don't know, eventually it's going to take a toll. We don't know which form it's going to express in the individual athlete. Could be GI issues, could be brain fog, could be energy issues like bonking, could be something worse. It's like pre-diabetes, diabetes, and even worse stuff, right? But it's going to happen, and or injuries. And the problem in endurance sports right now is a lot of people consider that normal.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You considered that normal before we started working.
I mean, the more carbs you eat, the more you had to eat.
Yeah.
And so it caught up with me for sure. And I feel like and I think as we get older too, and it's interesting because in Chinese medicine, the lungs and the large intestine are coupled meridians, and the lungs control our skin. So it makes sense when you have a guppy GI stuff, whatever, like leaky gut, that it's going to affect your lungs and your skin. And that's exactly what happened to me. And I knew right away the pattern.
Yeah. And that's just all gone away, right?
Right. Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And, as a healthcare practitioner and an athlete, what would be your advice to people?
Yeah. I think educate themselves about carbs in general. I spent a lot of time with my folks, my patients, working with them to help them understand that carbs are not great. Not supposed to have
in chronic huge amounts.
We're not meant to have fruit all year round. And the causes of inflammation when they're doing their carbs, people were afraid of fats for so long that it was horrible. And it's very hard when you have that brain thing, like input for years and years. So I tell my patients, this is what I want you to think about. I'm telling you now that so many carbs is not good. And I say, this wall in my clinic, what color is that? They would say brown. And I would say, what if I told you that wall was red? That's not red, right? So it's the same concept. We're telling you now that this is not the way we should be eating. And people, if you look at the old movies, people weren't overweight. People weren't obese. And I say to them, look at the children, look what's happening to our children. So do you think what our dietary guidelines have told us is working? I don't think so.
No. Yeah. And what, as a woman, a female athlete, a Chinese medicine practitioner, and an endocrinologist, what would you say to one of my pet peeves? And that is exactly that. I mean, especially important for women from menarche, through their childbearing years, through menopause.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I see that's, women are hormonally, in terms of the hormonal balance, incredibly complex and dynamic.
Yeah.
And it starts at menarche, where kids are getting, young women are getting into that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And the messaging they're getting is this self-image stuff, be skinny, I don't want to kill animals.
Very hard, yeah.
And they start eating junk food, essentially high carb, high sugar junk food at a time in their life when they're developing and they need to get on lower carb, nutritionally dense, fat dense things to things. Let's talk about that. And then let's segue into, get your perspective on that. And then let's segue into women in their childbearing years, because I've got some important things I'd like to put out there for you then.
Yeah. So more and more children are becoming obese now. And what we know about fat cells is that they hold on to estrogen. So we see a lot of kids that have, not just kids, have excess estrogen. So if you have excess estrogen, that sets you up for all kinds of health problems. Fat will never spike your insulin, right? Sugar, carbs will spike your insulin, which then can turn into fat. And what happens then is when you have too much sugar in your body, your cells will not allow anything in, because it's like they put gloves on. So your pancreas puts out, or your pancreas puts out insulin to try and clean up that sugar, right, of your body, because it said now the alarm went off, too much sugar. But what's happening is the cells are saying, I'm protecting myself. So insulin resistance, so nothing can get through. So now all your energy, the food you're eating, is not transformed and transported into the cells. So people start getting ulcers in their leg. You see this in diabetic people, because the cells are not being nourished, and that's very scary.
Yeah. I find I've got this analogy, this thought of mine is that we're looking at insulin all wrong in today's modern society, because we're using it as a blunt sledgehammer to drive down blood sugar. General, right? That's what most people are talking about insulin. Even the low carb health experts are talking about insulin only from this standpoint that you need, if you're a type 1 diabetic or even if you're healthy as an athlete, insulin is what drives your blood sugar down, right? And we're using it, because we're using so much carbohydrates, we're using insulin as a blunt sledgehammer, whereas this other perspective, which is something I've been talking a lot about, and I want people to understand and think about, is in the context of where we are now, high carbs, it is a blunt sledgehammer. However, in the context of low insulin with carbohydrate restriction and high insulin, which is going to give you high insulin sensitivity, which means your cells are very sensitive to that.
Right.
Insulin is actually one of the most anabolic hormones after HGH and testosterone.
Right.
it's very anabolic, and that's actually what helps young children who have high insulin sensitivity get big, because milk, whether it's cow's milk or breast milk, has what they call IGF, which is insulin-like growth factor.
Right.
And so when you look at it in that context, it's like, oh, maybe we can use insulin to help us as an athlete and to be healthier by restricting carbs, getting our insulin sensitivity up, our insulin levels down. When I say down, not the reference range, I mean below 8, right?
Right.
Get into that sensitive level where we can use the insulin to help drive those anabolic processes.
Yeah. And we know there's a syndrome called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which many women have, and it impedes fertility. And all it is insulin resistance.
Yeah, it's a manifestation of insulin resistance.
That's all it is. And the thing is, because when you have too much sugar in your body, your hormones get all whacked out.
Yep.
So the best remedy for that is get them on 50 grams of carbs a day. They lose 10% of their body fat. And guess what? A lot of times they can get pregnant on their own, but nobody's telling them. They're putting people on metformin. They're using these, can't even pronounce some of the drugs they're now using for slowing the GI tract down to lose weight. It's scary.
Yeah, and it goes even further than that. So now for the audience, we're segueing into women in their childbearing years. PCOS is a manifestation of insulin resistance, but on top of that, with all those carbs, you've got all this energy the body has to dispose of now, because glucose is acutely toxic if it remains elevated, right?
Yeah.
Because of the, part of it's that inflammatory load, right?
Yes.
So you have all this quote unquote energy, excess energy that's gone nuclear, and the body has to do something with it. So another facet, especially for women in their childbearing years, is cholecystectomies, which is a gallbladder removal.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's like one of the most common procedures with women from their late 30s into their early 50s. And it's so common that in medical terminology, it's called the 4 Fs: female, fat, fertile, 40.
Right.
And this has to do with females who've had a couple of kids or not even had kids.
Right.
But they're getting too many carbs, too many calories. And because of that person's hormonal profile, that excess energy, some of it might be going to fat, but they're not getting obese. What's happening is eating a high carb diet is causing problems on the other end, which I'll describe in a minute. But part of what the liver does with that excess energy is it converts it into cholesterol, which then is shunted to the gallbladder as bile, because bile is made up of cholesterol, because now you're not making a baby, you're not nursing a baby, which are both cholesterol rich processes.
Right.
So that cholesterol's got to go somewhere. So it goes to the gallbladder. But since you're eating a high carb meal and you're snacking, because that's what they told us to do, right? Because you eat 5 or 6 small meals so you don't get those massive glucose spikes from 3 meals of high carbs, low fat. You're not getting the trigger of breaking a fast with a protein fat rich meal that triggers the gallbladder to have that big ejection of bile, which emulsifies the fat so you can uptake the nutrition. And so the gallbladder and bile ducts get clogged.
Right.
And that's where you lose your gallbladder. And one of the athletes I actually worked with was Amanda Stevens in her final year of long course triathlon, where she had the most successful year of her career, because she had actually lost her gallbladder at the Olympic Training Center doing Olympic distance triathlon, and because she was on the high carb diet. And we got her on bile salts, and got her fat adapted, and it just made a big difference. But that's another thing that happens, and nobody talks about it. It's so common in medicine now that it's seen as normal.
I know. That's just because everybody's having their gallbladder removed doesn't mean that it's normal, but it is predictable. Yeah.
It's very
Well,
predictable.
and what's interesting, Peter, is that they have now looked at women with PCOS, which is insulin resistance, and it can be passed on 3 generations, epigenetics. So if the mom has too much sugar in her system, her gallbladder will try and clean up mommy's sugar, but it will not go through the umbilical cord. So now the babies got all this sugar, and they've done a lot of studies on cord blood and hormone discrepancies. And a lot of little boys now are being born with genitalia inadequacies that they're blaming now on
What's happening in
excess
utero.
estrogen.
Yeah. Well, and to a point, the epidemiology suggests that men's testosterone level is 50% of what it was 50 years ago.
Oh yeah, they're dumbing down now a normal sperm analysis. They've had to dumb it down because nobody would be in the reference range.
I didn't want to go there because the science is pretty new and people don't like to talk about it because it creates a lot of guilt, which people should not have because they're getting the advice. But a lot of children are affected with that genetic thing in utero. It's not just once they're born and what they're eating then. So it predisposes them to weight gain, hormonal imbalances, low T, and all the things we're seeing today. And then on top of that, another pet peeve I have is when you go to these kids games like ASYO soccer and all these different youth sports, they're feeding them sugar.
Oh, I know.
The snacks and drinks are all sugar, and it's like this.
I know.
This is a train wreck. But it's good for the medical industry.
Yeah, we won't go there, but no, I agree. And so that's why I think the work that you guys are doing, and I do, I work as much as I can. I have a couple of athletes now who are asking me, what are you doing? So a friend of mine, she's kind of menopausal now. She's an amazing athlete. She qualified for Kona. And I just met her through our master's team. And she came to see me a few months ago. And I talked to her about OFM. I have this beautiful handout where they can just click on and link. And so we walked her through that a little bit. And part of it was she said her husband comes home with M&Ms and Smarties and chips and that kind of thing. And she said, he's gained 30 pounds. He used to do triathlons, but he's now, starting a new business or something. He's gained 30 pounds. And so she was frustrated. She finally went to him after seeing me a few times. She went to him and she said, I need your help. She said, I've got to make these changes. I'm hot flashing, night sweating, and I'm miserable. I need you to not bring this stuff into the house. And he said, okay. So I checked with her 2 months ago, and I think he's lost 25 or 30 pounds.
Did her perimenopausal symptoms reduce to?
Yes. Well, I treated her with acupuncture and herbs too, but yes, I mean, she's still having some, but it's not at all what it used to be. And I rode with her the other day. It's like, she's just badass. She's in her 50s,
Yep.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's like, how do you get this message out? Except for me, I show by example. And I tell my patients.
That's why we have you on is you're somebody who has longevity in the sport.
Yeah.
You have a medical background. That's why I want you to be part of our medical advisory team because everybody on our medical advisory team are both medical experts or have research backgrounds, but they're also living that life of OFM where they're prioritizing their fat metabolism over being carbohydrate dependent.
Right.
And so it's kind of like years ago, and this is why I spent the time with you early on, is years ago, I resigned myself to the fact that even though this is a scientifically sound evolutionary biology backed way of
concept,
concept, that simple one-dimensional message of you need carbs and the more the better for performance is such a strong thing that people, it's really hard to get people to change. So I figured that I'm going to have to build this one athlete at a time. And then as those athletes get out there, people are going to look at them, and we're not going to get everybody, but we're going to start picking off people, and we'll get to that critical mass where we kind of are now because we're doing it so long, and so many athletes like you, Jeff Browning, Peter Mortimer. We've got a guy named Kurt Madden who's racing in the 65 to 69.
That's
he just
amazing.
got 12th at the World Championships. Or people with longevity in sport have had a completely new lease on life where they're performing at a level they can't believe by making this switch. And like we say, we don't eliminate the carbs, because that's the problem with straight keto is you don't get the performance benefits. Plus, you don't get the adaptive stress you need with keto, because it keeps you on such a low level that you can't get that adaptation in training to signal to your body it has to get stronger to build the metabolic capacity you need to perform better.
Yeah. No, that is not sustainable. And I always clarify with my patients or who I talk to, this is not keto. You cannot.
You got to kind of like say it to them a dozen times.
I know. Right.
Because what happens is what we're doing, and I say we because you're one of my athletes and collaborators in this, right?
Yeah.
What we're doing is so innovative. There's no frame of reference. So the people, because of this messaging, because people can't understand it, they just default to whatever frame of reference they arbitrarily think it is, which is keto, because we're not doing high carb.
Right.
It's a crazy thing.
It is, and you're right. Maybe it's going to be one person at a time, But I'm hopefully, I've made a little dent in some of my friends who are triathletes, and starting to see, like, she's totally leaned out more now. It's funny because the first time I met her, she has the same strength trainer, and so she had her training, and then I worked with my trainer Chris after, and Chris told me the next time I saw him, she said, this girl that she's in the 50 to 54, he said, she told me, Chris, I want to look like her. And then I looked her up and I said, I want to be fast like her. So by example, part of it's got to be by example. And sometimes people have to hear things 3 times, 6 times before they sort it all goes in, because it goes against everything we were taught.
That's right. And but it's working, and it does have a sound scientific basis, whether you're talking about Western medicine, Oriental medicine, or evolutionary biology. I mean, Vespa is an accidental discovery of nature. I mean, it's based on millions of years of evolution for insects,
Right. And truthfully, our endocrine systems have not changed since the caveman. Our core endocrine system, kidneys, pancreas, pituitary, it hasn't changed. So we've really gotten off track with food. And I tell my patients, you don't have to do triathlons, but just get out and walk, just move. Get some sun in your eyes, just go out and walk, and those who follow it do really well.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what I call my 3 constants. Like, most things are dynamic and variable, but my 3 constants are: 1, you're an individual.
Right.
And you need to take control of your health, right? Everybody needs to remember that. Take control of your health. Don't depend on all that messaging out there. Because you're an individual. You're an N equals 1, and N equals 1 is science for you.
Right.
People forget that because the science people say, oh, N equals 1, anecdotal, doesn't work. Well, as far as you, the individual, goes, if you're experimenting and finding out what works, that's science for you.
Right.
Two is our cells are meant to burn fat aerobically,
Right.
right? And by having too many carbohydrates in the diet, chronic stress, chronic overconsumption of carbohydrates, and all these other factors, we're burning way too many carbohydrates most of the time than we should.
Right.
So we're meant to burn our cells from an evolutionary science-based thing are meant to burn fat aerobically. Unfortunately, we've moved so far away from that we think normal is carbs.
Right.
Right. And nobody, as an aside, one of the problems I see with the high carb camp is they always talk about carbs for performance, which is no disagreement between you and me, but they always forget and avoid talking about the unintended consequences of what is literally consuming massive amounts of sugar.
Right.
Like I did a calculation the other day based on it's the standard advice.
Yes. For
training a 6-month lead up to an Ironman, a full Ironman. If you're training like 12 hours a week and doing the high carb thing, it amounts to basically, and conservatively speaking, so 2 gels an hour, blah, blah, blah. So 200 calories an hour of carbs during training, more during racing. Conservatively speaking, that's 155 pounds of sugar.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And we're not saying eliminate that. I'm saying, what if you can get rid of a third of that? Instead of 155, that's a 55-pound bag of sugar you're eliminating.
Right.
Right? That's not a big one.
Yeah. And I wish I could remember, like, I kind of keep track of my carbs when I race. I would say I do a 70.3, maybe 300 to 400 grams of carbs. That's including my Tailwind, all that stuff. And I don't take it all at once. It's like a little bit at a time. And of course, on the colder races, it's higher. On the hot races, I eat much less. But to me, that's incredible. When you say 2 gels per hour, I mean, I've seen that with Ironman, 2 gels per hour. Imagine your poor gut.
The pros are taking 3 or 4.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're recommending anywhere from 80 to 120 grams an hour for
of carbs or
carbs for racing situations in ultras and triathlons for the pros. I mean, they're putting out that kind of energy, but it's like that can't end well.
They're young, maybe they can support it for now, but they will eventually not be able to sustain that.
But the impacts are huge, right? It's like if you can get away with 10 or 20% less and get the same or better performance, which I know is attainable by optimizing that underlying fat metabolism, it's huge. But just for the average person who's wanting to do triathlon as a sport, to do well at it and to be healthy, it's like, looking at that 155 pounds of sugar in a 6-month lead up.
Unbelievable.
It's crazy. And I'll do the math and get
that. Yeah.
But
I always say, there's science and then there's nature. Right. Yeah. And sometimes Paul will say, I would have worked with an IVF patient who he couldn't help, and they would come to me and get pregnant. And he'd go, I don't know how you do it, Diane. Or I've got a couple 46-year-old women who were sent to me because their ovarian reserve was low and they both got pregnant. And Paul says to me, how do you do it? I say, there's science and then there's nature. If you correct the nature, the root cause, give them, what they need, it's going to automatically correct the system and do what they're meant to be. 46 is not a typical age for women to have babies, but it does happen. You've probably read about the Hunza tribes. The Hunza tribe, longevity, they're having kids, in their 50s and 60s,
Yeah. My friend Simon Matui, who has a guide service on Kilimanjaro, his grandfather was a Maasai, and the Hunza are the still nomadic offshoot of the Maasai.
Right.
He lived to 105.
My gosh.
And he had 5 wives.
Oh, wow.
or 4 wives. I can't remember. But the funniest story that Simon told me was one time he had this good friend of him, Sharon Katz, and Sharon is a incredibly intelligent type A achiever woman. So she's an administrator for a hospital group, very professional, lives in Oakland Hills, and this driven type A female. And she went to Kilimanjaro to climb Kili, and then she took the tour of the Maasai and the Serengeti, and Simon introduced her to her grandfather, and Simon's grandfather reached out and grabbed her arm and started stroking her, and was like, okay, are you going to be wife number 5? And Sharon didn't look at her, and Sharon did not know what to say, because here's this guy in his 90s and still vital and hitting on this woman.
Oh my God, that's crazy. Yeah. Paul's theory is you got to be healthy, happy, and horny.
Yeah, there you go.
Because that's what he says all the time when he had a Sustained Institute for Health. That's what he would tell people.
Yep.
And it's true.
Gotta keep it going. And so the third principle I have, so you have individual fat cells are primarily to burn fat, and then we're meant to move a lot.
Yep.
And those are my 3 constants. Right? And so everything else can be variable. Yeah. And you're certainly living that life very full, and even like you said, up until a year ago you were working a full-time job, not only as a acupuncturist and Oriental medicine doctor, but running a business, helping an IVF, helping your husband's IVF practice,
right,
and training and racing triathlon. So
yeah. And don't forget about the research that we did, early research, combining acupuncture, and went all over the world to present it. We went to Abu Dhabi and China a couple times. And I mean, sometimes I look back and go, I don't know how I did it, right?
Yeah, but it goes back to what you're saying about their science and nature. And one of the things that our human hubris tends to forget is that science is there to help us understand nature, not to dominate it. And we some scientific insight comes out, and all of a sudden we think that's it and we can dominate it.
Right. Because you can always find another research that doesn't show the same results.
Yeah, that's right. And unfortunately, what research has morphed into in the last probably 30 or 40 decades, or 3 or 4 decades, so 30 or 40 years, used to be a lot of funding for research was done through government, and it was just doled out. But now it's very industry driven,
right?
And so you don't hear about the research like you don't hear about the research you're doing in acupuncture. It's working,
right?
And yet you don't see research. You had to bootstrap that research. You don't have you don't have millions of dollars being funded into.
No.
Right.
We funded it ourselves. Yeah.
Right. And I talk a lot about natto kinase, eating natto. And it's like when you look at the basic research on it, it's solid.
Yeah.
Compared to say something like warfarin or other blood thinners.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And yet it's not commonly used in medicine as a blood viscosity regulator, even though it actually works better and has less side effects because there's no money in it.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Pharmaceuticals. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because one of Paul's and my challenge was, how do you put Eastern medicine into a Western box? And so it took us 4 years or so to get it published. How did we put it in the box? Well, we looked at hormones. Right. And that was the key. Okay. And that showed more pregnancies, fewer miscarriages, more take-home babies, and fewer multiples in some age groups. Right. Because the woman is supposed to have one healthy baby. So in ancient China, I mean, that's been around for 5,000 years. You never saw research on anything because you know what? You put the needle in, pain goes away, it works. You don't have to do a scientific, what do you call it? You call it, there's a word that you call it by getting a result from not scientifically, but I forget it.
It's anecdotal.
Anecdotal, but there was another one that you sent me in the email. But I mean, that's kind of it. Of course, now in China, there are all kinds of studies coming out on IVF and pain and that kind of thing. But you know, in that era, we didn't have to do science to know that something worked.
Yeah. And also what happens is like, and this is why I always tell you, use your type A to lose your type A. Because and here's the perfect example, your career. Your accumulated knowledge as an acupuncturist, Oriental medicine, and working in IVF with endocrinology, you've accumulated this body of knowledge that you don't have to think consciously about. You're integrating all these things into this matrix of, okay, how do I work with this patient? What do they got going on? What's their diet like? What's their chronic stressors like? What conditions might they have? And that's not how science works. You're supposed to look at one thing and control all the other variables.
Right.
And so it's very hard to publish this kind of thing because you see, like, even I'm sure Paul's the same way. I mean, there's a lot of things he does with a patient on an individual basis that he's not chronicling every single detail. He just knows what to do and do it, but he's collating through his brain all this stuff that's coming together.
Years of experience, yes.
Yeah. And science doesn't work that way, you know, and it's very, you know, it's a static moment that helps us understand what's going on. But with that understanding, we can integrate that into that holistic approach that takes into account all these things. And you're doing that.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep reminding you about that with your triathlon training is like this, nothing exists in a vacuum. It's all one big melange that's very dynamic, right?
Yeah. And I really, you know, I keep talking about Finland, but I really feel like that was a switch for me. I wasn't eating the food I should, wasn't sleeping very well. I mean, all these things that I would be very disturbed about, and that I actually had it in me to finish this very difficult race. I mean, that's for some reason, it's just like I let go. I did what I could, and top 10, I'll take it coming off an injury. You know what? So maybe I'm not so worried about missing a training ride here or there or doing something there that I feel like I have to do.
The extra glass of wine or the
dessert. You know, if I'm tired, stay in bed, right?
Yeah. And that's because, you know, what we do when you focus on your fat metabolism versus carbohydrate metabolism, you're getting your body back to where it's building that metabolic capacity to where, hey, if things are suboptimal, whether it's for social reasons, enjoyment, or just you can't do it, it's not a big deal. Right. It's not, you know, you can't keep doing that forever.
No.
But it's not something you have to get all like, oh my God.
Doesn't have to be perfect. You can miss a workout. And I think that was my biggest message.
Yeah.
With this whole knee injury in Finland. And I'm thrilled that I got it. You know,
it's a great thing. So
it is. Yeah.
Any other things you can share with the audience about your journey that can help them on theirs?
Oh gosh. I mean, I guess for me, I've been through a lot of hard things in my life with that chronic fatigue, where I had to kind of let some things go and got rid of some ghosts in my closet for, you know, emotional health. And then I came through a really bad high-speed rollover car accident where I broke my neck and my scalp was torn apart and my thumb was, and I got back. Like I was in a coma for days and they weren't sure what I was going to remember, right? And I came back from that using the tools I knew, right? Acupuncture, PT. I had a lot of visual disturbances. and then slap tear on my shoulder, and then I had to have a couple cyst removes in my back. And so bottom line is, what I'm saying is that when you have the tools, and this is where we educate ourselves, when you educate yourself and you have the tools, you don't have to give up what you love. You don't have to roll over and play dead, and know that you're going to be okay. Because I think sometimes the first accident or something happens and you think, I'm done. But you get through that, and then another little tweak happens, and then the knee happens, and it's like, oh, it's okay. I know that I can get through this with the tools. So your point to educating people, proving that the way we're all living may not be the way we should be living, is key to our journey in health and longevity. And
Yeah, and one of the things that I think that's a big hallmark of OFM, because we're talking about metabolism and physiology, is once you get your metabolism and physiology on the right track, whether it was the time you departed from Western medicine to Eastern medicine,
yeah,
or when you found OFM, that with the right inputs and changes, the body is the most powerful tool to heal itself.
right.
This doesn't discount Western medicine and interventions when they're needed, right?
Thank
Like
God for it. Yes.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. But the base should be getting your metabolic house in order, because with that metabolic house in order, the body just has this remarkable ability to just heal itself and stay on that pathway. Whereas when you get this metabolic derangement, like when your insulin's too high, it just sets you on that pathway of a cascade of events that just keeps growing.
Yeah.
And when you're on that other pathway of metabolic capacity and continuing to build that, it sets your trajectory on that path of that upward cascade.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's true. It's something that I'm still learning and getting more secure in what I believe in and how I'm living. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on this podcast. Thanks for being part of our team.
You're welcome.
And
I look forward to it. Yeah. And I know that some of your medical team really helped me through this knee injury. And I feel like sometimes you have to get your team around you, and it may be different for everyone else.
Absolutely. It's like
Yeah.
You've known me since 2013. It's like I'm finally getting that group of people around me to help me do the stuff I'm terrible at. I mean, I know that I'm good at this, but
Right.
I God, like we were funneling around before, like in terms of
I
tech,
know.
we're both disasters.
I know. That's okay.
So,
We have our strengths and we have our less
Right.
dominant things, right?
Right. But in
That's
today's world, I need people on my team that are tech savvy and can
Yeah.
get that stuff out. And fortunately, I've got those people around me, and thank God for them. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You could never do it yourself, for sure.
yeah, no,
Well, I
no,
appreciate you. I so appreciate that I bumped into you and that it's been an amazing journey for me. And I want to keep doing these until it's not fun anymore. And
well, let's
who knows?
keep it all fun, Diane. And I appreciate your friendship, your feedback,
Yeah.
our collaboration, and you do look fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, don't thank yourself. You're doing the work, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and let's just keep on that road.
That's it. Yeah. My mom is 91 and she's going strong. It's so hopefully the genes are there and I can keep my genes where they need to be.
Yeah, your
Still fit
mitochondrial
into my genes, right?
right. The mitochondrial DNA is there, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you
awesome.
very much.
Okay,
and
thanks, Peter.
take care.
All right, we'd be in touch. Bye-bye.